Part two. All right. We're delighted to be joined by John Wilmoth, who you've known well, is a veteran of these press briefings. He's the director of the Population Division and in DESA, and Claire Minozzi, the Population Affairs Officer, is joining us virtually. I don't know if we can put her on the screen up here. And they are discussing the release of the International Migration 2020 report. John, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Steph. Can we confirm that Claire is connected and that she can speak? Just make sure.
Claire, can you hear us?
And can you speak?
Yes, good afternoon.
Okay, very good.
There we go. We see you. You're on the screen. Perfect. Thank you.
Good to have you there. Good afternoon, everyone. Distinguished members of the United Nations Press Corps, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Wilmoth, and I'm the director of the Population Division in the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you today about the release of new global data on international migration from the 2020 update of the International Migrant Stock and the accompanying highlights report. And here's the cover of the highlights report. I came into my office early this morning intending to make some print copies, but having not been in my office for 10 months, making the printers work was a little more challenging than I had anticipated. So I show you on my iPad what the cover looks like, and it's available online, of course. The data set includes global estimates of the number of international migrants for 232 countries and areas of the world from 1990 until 2020. The data are disaggregated by age, sex, country of origin, and country of destination. According to these latest estimates, the number of international migrants worldwide reached 281 million persons in 2020, up from 173 million in 2000. Worldwide, international migrants account for just 3.6% of the total population. But this share has increased gradually over the years, up from 2.8% in 2000. Last year, in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic affected drastically all forms of human mobility, including international migration. And while it is too soon to understand the full extent of the impact of the pandemic on migration trends, these new estimates indicate that the disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic may have reduced the number of international migrants by around 2 million globally by the middle of 2020, corresponding to a decrease of around 27% in the growth that we would have expected from mid-2019 to mid-2020. I should say all of these estimates refer to the middle of the year. That's why I'm focusing on what had happened by mid-2020. The new data confirm that nearly 2/3 of all international migrants in 2020 were living in high-income countries. International migrants comprised around 15% of the total population in high-income countries compared to less than 2% in middle-income and low-income countries. Just over half of all international migrants lived in Europe or Northern America. Northern Africa and Western Asia posted the highest growth rate in the number of international migrants over the past 2 decades, and this was driven mostly by countries of Western Asia, specifically the Gulf countries. By contrast, the number of international migrants residing in Central and Southern Asia has changed very little since 2000. In 2020, nearly half of all international migrants were residing in another country within their region of origin. So, for example, Europe had the largest proportion of intra-regional migration. And to quantify this, among all migrants who were born in Europe, among all international migrants born in Europe, 70% were residing in another European country. Conversely, for Central and Southern Asia, that region had the largest share of its diaspora residing outside the region of origin. So these new data confirm that international migrants are highly concentrated in a small number of countries. In 2020, the country with the largest number of international migrants was the United States of America, with 51 million international migrants. Germany and Saudi Arabia hosted the second and third largest numbers of migrants worldwide, with around 16 and 13 million, respectively, compared to 51 million in the United States. The number of refugees and asylum seekers has continued to rise rapidly, and it has doubled in size from 2000 to 2020, rising from 17 million to 34 million over those 2 decades. Growth in the number of refugees and asylum seekers accounted for about 16% of the total increase in the number of international migrants worldwide during this period. In 2020, low and middle income countries hosted the vast majority of the world's refugees and asylum seekers. Refugees and asylum seekers comprised only 3% of international migrants in high-income countries, but this compares to 25% of all migrants in middle-income countries who are refugees or asylum seekers, and 50% of the total in low-income countries. So most international migrants are in the high-income countries, but among international migrants, the specific category of refugees and asylum seekers are concentrated in the low-income countries, in the middle-income countries. Northern Africa and Western Asia hosted the largest number of refugees and asylum seekers, with about 40% of the global total. And that was followed by Sub-Saharan Africa, which hosted close to 17% of global migrants, global refugees and asylum seekers. Concerning migrants' countries of origin, the 2020 data showed that 63 million international migrants were born in countries of Europe, and 51 million in countries of Central and Southern Asia. Latin America and the Caribbean was the source of 43 million international migrants, and there were another 38 million originating in Eastern and Southeastern Asia. So these are the regions that are the largest areas of origin for migrants. To just review: Europe, Central and Southern Asia, Latin America and the Caribbean, and Eastern and Southeastern Asia. 1/3 of all international migrants originated in just 10 countries. India is the leading country of origin, with roughly 18 million persons born in India who are now living abroad. Mexico has contributed the second largest diaspora, with 11 million migrants living in other countries, followed by the Russian Federation, the People's Republic of China, and the Syrian Arab Republic. Concerning the age and sex distribution of international migrants, women comprised a bit less than half of all international migrants in 2020. And in fact, our estimates show that the share of female migrants among all international migrants has declined slightly, from 49.4% in 2000 to 48.1% in 2020. So a slight decrease, but notable. In 2020, female migrants outnumbered male migrants by a small margin in Europe, Northern America, and Oceania. By contrast, in Northern Africa and Western Asia and in Sub-Saharan Africa, the number of male migrants significantly exceeded the number of female migrants. It has to do with the nature of the work, mostly, that migrants engage in the different areas of the world. Nearly 3/4 of all international migrants in 2020 were in the working age range, between 20 and 65 years of age. About 41 million were below the age of 20 years, and the remaining 34 million were age 65 or older. But again, 3/4 in the working age range, which is notable. Most countries have adopted policies to manage international migration by regulating the flow of persons across borders, promoting the benefits of migration for development, and addressing its many challenges, including irregular migration. Globally, of the 111 governments that responded to a recent survey distributed by the Population Division, 54% of those governments reported having policies to facilitate orderly, safe, regular, and responsible migration, as called for in Target 10.7 of the Sustainable Development Goals. So in conclusion, these are some of the major trends and key findings from our latest data on international migrants. For additional details, I invite you to visit the website of the Population Division at www.unpopulation.org. Again, unpopulation.org. Where you will find the updated data set, the draft, the report, a wealth of related materials, including this statement, the press release, a list of 10 key findings from this work, and of course the data set itself. Thank you for your interest and participation in today's briefing. I'd also like to acknowledge the work of the Population Division staff who prepared these new estimates and drafted the highlights report that was featured in this presentation. In particular, Claire Minozzi, who's accompanying me today, was the principal author of the report. So at this time, Claire and I would be happy to invite any questions that you may have.
All right, Edie?
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilmot and Claire. Edith Lederer from the Associated Press on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association. Thank you very much for doing this briefing on a report I am sure of interest worldwide. You said that you estimated a 27% decrease from the middle of 2020 in international migration. Can you give us the exact figures for the first half of 2020 and the second half, or the estimated figures? And my question really is, how big an impact on international migration did the United States border closing and perhaps border closings in other countries have on those figures? Thank you.
Great. John or Claire? I don't know who wants to take the question.
Well, I'll take a first stab, and then maybe Claire can fill in some of the details. You know, the estimate that we've come up with is based on an assumption, which is that basically all movement stopped at the start of March across international borders. And there's ample evidence of this, that by August 2020, there had been more than 80,000 travel restrictions imposed by 219 countries or territories across the world. And so the wealth of border closures and internal and international travel restrictions and rules regarding lockdowns, we do not have a lot of direct evidence on what this has done to migration. Therefore, we took a very simple approach of assuming that basically all international migration stopped as of a certain point. Claire can clarify, I believe it was the beginning of March. And therefore, what we would have estimated to be the change or the increase in international migration over that time period, like I say, these estimates go from the middle of one year to the middle of the next year. So that's why we talked about the decrease up until the middle of 2020. I don't know if we've tried to come up with an estimate for the second half of 2020. Maybe Claire can fill us in on that. Claire, did we make an estimate for the second half of 2020, or are we?
Well, we haven't included it in the report. I think we felt that the assumption of having zero growth for the period of 1st of March to the 1st of July of 2020 was quite sound. As you explained, we know that the borders were closed in almost all countries of the world. And for the second half, we have a sense that it will be probably comparable, if not more so. But in fact, we're really looking forward to having more empirical information on this so that we can make more sound assessment. But you can think of it also in terms of the estimate here is for approximately 4 months of zero growth. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the statistics.
Yeah, go ahead,
Sure.
Edie.
So what actually are the actual numbers that are estimated from mid 2019 to mid 2020?
So you're saying, what was the increase
Yeah.
in international migration over that time period? Claire, can you tell me what the annual increase?
Yes, so the decrease caused by this COVID adjustment is around 2 million. And so we think that it would have been around 7 to 8 million.
The increase from mid-2019 to mid-2020 would have been around 7 million. And
Yeah.
we've reduced that by 2 million by assuming that everything stopped after March, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Carla?
I may have missed something, but did you state the reasons for the migration, and in particular, do you have any information on why it was so high in India? I know that DESA has put out some very, very informative reports in the past. In fact, I rely on your reports more than anything else. But they have described the kind of poverty that exists in India, and I was wondering whether that was a motivation or if they're very complicated motives.
Well, there are multiple reasons that people move, and this report does not give detail on the reasons or the categories of migration, or either the legal categories or the personal motivations. But the migration from India, I believe, is largely motivated by labor concerns. But there's also a fair element of family reunion going on. I mean, for family purposes and labor, these are the major reasons that people move. Moving, forced displacement is a much smaller category in the total, maybe around 10% of the total. So I don't know the detailed numbers for India, but I believe the overwhelming or the largest category would be for labor purposes. Maybe Claire can fill us in with some more detail on that.
Thank you, John. So the Indian diaspora is one of the most vibrant, dynamic diasporas in the world. It's also the largest. It's present in all continents, in all regions, and it's a diverse diaspora. So as John mentioned, it's comprised predominantly of persons who are work, but also students and people who have moved for family reasons. There is a very large presence of migrants who were born in India in the Gulf countries, where they are playing a central role in the economic prosperity of the countries, working in construction, hospitality, care services, and so forth. They're also widely present in Northern America and Canada, in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Australia. And if you look, for example, at the US, I know from the education statistics on some of the persons who are born in India that they have often a very high educational attainment, so tertiary or even postdoc and so forth. So I think it's a very good question, but it's an extremely complex and dynamic group.
Thank you. Helena Lença from LUSA, Portuguese agency. You should be on the screen.
Hi, it's me. Thank you so much for the briefing and for taking my question, Stefan. I want to go to see the example of Angola, which I could see in the report. I have consulted the report, and Angola is one of the countries that saw its transnational diaspora reduce in the last 20 years. And it says in the report it's because of the end of the conflict that happened there. So what can you comment in this particular case? I guess it's a good sign that people go home and try to get better conditions.
Personally, I don't have any specific comments about Angola. I'm afraid I'm not informed to be able to answer your question with authority. So I will ask my colleague Claire if she has an answer on this specific issue.
Claire?
Yeah, so I think what we know from our estimates and our revision is that the diaspora indeed decreased. And I think we attributed that in part to the data we had from UNHCR on returns. And looking at the numbers, I have them in front of me. I can see for Angola that the migrant population in the country itself actually increased, but the size of their diaspora declined.
Thank you.
Okay, I have another question about Brazil. That it's the country in the South America that is the second most frequent origin of migrants, although there are no conflicts. And so, is your opinion that is it only because of the population dimension is so big in Brazil that this country has the most immigrants from South America?
I can take the question if you wish.
Sure.
So in terms of, I think this is a common misperception that migration is a reaction to lack of opportunity. That may be the case in some contexts, but it's also the sign of dynamism and the fact that a person, an individual, makes a choice to pursue opportunities, and also the notion that a person would migrate and then forever leave their country is also no longer the case. Most migrants, actually, we know now have an experience of moving abroad, but then they return. They would go abroad to study and then bring back some of the knowledge that they acquired abroad and so forth. So I think the fact that Brazil has, like India, it has a rich and diverse diaspora, that is a sign not necessarily of a lack of opportunity at home, but simply of the dynamism of the country. If you look at our report, I think one point that we tried to make is that actually high-income countries per capita have a higher diaspora than middle-income countries. So again, signaling that migration does not necessarily signal the lack of opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, in the back.
Thank you very much. What about the Syrian refugees and the migrants, though? Where are they going today? We know the tension with Turkey is not making it any easier on the border. Neighboring Lebanon is collapsing. Iraq, same thing. I'm surprised to see actually the number of Syrian migrants along with Chinese, Russian, Indian, and Mexican. So where do they fit in here, the Syrians? And especially after all the doors in Europe have also been shut in the face of those migrants. So what can you tell us about them?
Yeah, my knowledge about this is general. I'm going to ask Claire if she wants to give us some specific information. I know the bordering countries, in particular Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey, have been taking the vast majority. But how that's changed over time, yes, it's one of the largest diasporas in the world, but we could say not for good reasons. In many other countries, it reflects people seeking opportunities abroad, but in this case, obviously, it's to escape a terrible situation. Claire, do you have any comments on where, how that's changed the dynamics of refugees from Syria, where they're settling now?
So I think both you and the journalist colleague pointed out a lot of it's really clustered in the region and the neighboring countries of Turkey and Jordan, where they represent a very large share of all the migrants living in that country are refugees from Syria. I was looking at some of the data from UNHCR, and I know there is some attempt to offer opportunities for return. And one of the photos featured in our report is actually of a gentleman who went back to Syria. Of course, we also know that Germany has been a recipient of refugees and asylum seekers from Syria, and they stand out in that respect, and other countries also have made attempts. But we tried to, using the data from UNHCR, we tried to underscore how frequently refugees, and John made that point in his presentation, often remain within their region, and the issue of sharing responsibility is very important, and it was definitely highlighted in the context of the Global Compact for refugees.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Stefano Vaccaro of Voce di New York, you go on the screen. And I think that'll have to be our last question. Stefano?
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, this is a question I do often when we're talking about migrants. and it's to do with when the migrants, I mean, the status of migrants all of a sudden can become a refugee. Because it's not clear. I mean, I understand, I know the law to be a refugee, but for example, I know that migrants or refugees, if you want, from Venezuela were called refugees for a long time by the UN in South America. And for example, migrants from Libya, they're trying to reach Europe, they are not called refugee, at least for specific reason, but they are usually called migrants, even if they escape from a country in war, and also they are prisoners in camps and they torture, and so I don't know how you can, how you can call a person that he's in that condition not a refugee when he's trying to escape Libya. So can you, in your report, do you have there is any solution of this dilemma about when to call, when a migrant, somebody that maybe started as a migrant, becomes a refugee? Thank you.
It's a very good question. I'm going to ask Claire to take this one. I think she'll give you a more authoritative answer on this.
Yeah, so unfortunately, our report does not address the issue of how the classification occurs. I think that's defined by, standards such as the UN Convention on the Rights of Refugees. In our report, we definitely discuss the issue of forced displacement, and we highlight the aspect of Venezuela that you mentioned and referred to. And we are citing the data from UNHCR. The most recent data we had available at the time when we were doing the estimates for this report was from the end of 2019. And in the category we have refugees and asylum seekers. I think it was about 800,000 asylum seekers, 90,000 refugees, and 3.6 million persons who are considered displaced, but were neither refugees nor asylum seekers. They were displaced across borders. And these people, it is my understanding that some of them were potentially eligible to be classified as refugees, but they hadn't applied because they had moved to countries within Latin America where they could avail themselves of other ways of obtaining residency and access to labor permits. So they haven't necessarily all applied.
But the gentleman's question was, I mean, we're counting these Venezuelans displaced abroad, we're counting them in the estimates of refugees and asylum seekers, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
But some other people in possibly a similar looking situation, is it true that there's some in a similar situation that we're not counting in the same category? Is that was the gentleman's question as I understood it?
Yeah, if I can, a very quick follow up. I don't have any problem with Venezuela being called refugees. I don't think that this is a political question about Venezuela. Mm-hmm. I don't understand why somebody escaping Venezuela is called refugee if somebody escaping torture in Libya is still called migrant. That was my question.
Mm-hmm. We may not have the answer for you. This may be something that we would have to refer to UNHCR to have a full explanation of that. I don't want to try and speak on that topic. We're not the ones who make those decisions. But I can just note that this is not a new question. The kind of the political context of defining who's a refugee and who is not. That's certainly been the case in the United States for many years. That people from certain countries, if they were especially political opponents of the United States, then if they came to the U.S., they were considered refugees. And if they came from just poor countries that were in a similar situation but not somehow politically estranged from the U.S., they weren't counted as refugees. I mean, there's a long history of this politicization of the definition of refugees. Claire, did you have something else to add?
No, I just wanted to clarify that our estimates include the data from UNHCR and from UNRWA. And we include them in our estimates, but we actually do not estimate ourselves the number of refugees and asylum seekers. This is something that we take from an agency that has the authority and the mandate to count these persons, and then we include them in our estimates as appropriate.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. John, thank you. Claire, thank you very much. And see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.